Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you for that kind introduction and for the invitation to be here with all of you. It's an honor to be before the DNC Youth Council. Look, we all know this country needs healing and hope and competence, of course, after this disastrous president. And I'm so excited for the Biden-Harris ticket that will bring all of those things to the presidency. I am honored that you asked me to read this. I felt very strongly as a member of the Democratic 2020 Platform Drafting Committee that a land acknowledgement should be rendered. And so I'm very proud that it made it into the platform and very honored to read it here today. Thank you. The Democratic National Convention Land Acknowledgement. The Democratic National Committee wishes to acknowledge that we gather together to state our values on lands that have been stewarded through many centuries by the ancestors and descendants of tribal nations who have been here since time immemorial. We honor the communities native to this continent and recognize that our country was built on indigenous homelands. We pay our respects to the millions of indigenous people throughout history who have protected our lands, waters, and animals. We respectfully acknowledge that we present this platform at our 2020 Democratic National Convention on the lands of the Bad River Band of the Lake Superior Tribe of Chippewa Indians, the Forest County Potawatomi Community, the Ho-Chunk Nation, the Lakota Band of Lake Superior Chippewa, the Lac du Flambe Band of Lake Superior Chippewa, the Menominee Nation, the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin, the Red Cliff Band of Lake Superior Chippewa, the San Croix Chippewa Indians of Wisconsin, the Sakaugan Chippewa Community, and the Stockbridge Munsee Community Band of Mohican Indians. Blessings to you all. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. To sing the national anthem, I would like to welcome the Kids from Wisconsin, a cast of 36 talented Wisconsin entertainers, ages 15 to 20. The production has toured for over half a century and has been enjoyed by 10 million people since 1969. The troupe not only performs in over 35 communities every summer, but also provides hands-on workshops in underserved communities, sensory-friendly performances, and online tutorials. Funds from performances go back to Wisconsin communities, enhancing the quality of life, education, entertainment, creativity, and civic vitality throughout the state. The kids, as they are known, hope to see you from the stage in 2021. Many of the videos and pictures you're about to see were recorded before COVID, which is why the kids are not social distancing. However, the audio was recorded over the past month. You may rise or kneel if you are able, per your preference.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous
Good afternoon, Democrats. My name is Michael Kapp. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I'm a DNC member from California. It's my honor to serve as chair of the DNC Youth Council during this tumultuous time in our nation's history. I'd like to welcome all of you here today, especially the members of the DNC Youth Council, which includes all DNC members under the age of 36, as well as 8 at-large members selected from each of the DNC's 4 regions, East, Midwest, South, and West. We are dedicating today at the Youth Council to tackling 2 of the biggest issues impacting our nation outside of the coronavirus: systemic racism and climate change. And tomorrow, we'll be covering the fight for DACA and a path to citizenship. We'll also be speaking with some of our national youth leadership about the pipeline for young people to get involved and shape the future of the Democratic Party. This is admittedly a unique space, but I hope you find this convention engaging and informative. Feel free to connect with me on Twitter throughout this week and beyond, as these events should only be the beginning of the conversation. Thank you for joining us here today. We have a vicious cycle on our hands. Young people tend not to vote in high numbers, which means that most politicians design their platforms and their communications around the values of people who vote more often, as well as their well-moneyed donors. This causes young people to tune out of the political process because they don't think that our elected representatives are listening to our concerns. Lately, Democrats have been bailed out by the fact that Donald Trump and the Republicans are a historically out of touch, racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic dumpster fire, steeped in hate, egomania, incompetence, self-interest, and corruption. But when it comes to winning elections, especially one where this administration is trying to rig it in its favor, we can't count on young voters being turned off enough by Donald Trump and his Republicans enablers to go vote. If we want to flip Texas, flip Georgia, keep our House majority, win the Senate, and maintain our momentum nationally while electing progressive Democrats up and down the ballot, we have to meet young people where they are. It's not good enough for Democrats to vote for Democrats simply because Democrats are simply less bad than the alternative. And it's not good enough for people to come out to vote just to vote against Republicans. Nor is it good enough for Americans to vote simply to stop the racists, the sexual abusers, the science deniers, the polluters, the corrupt, or those who enable all of them. We must set a higher bar. We owe that to one another and to future generations. We need to get young people to buy into voting for Democrats and be excited into voting for Democrats because of who we are, because of our clear values, and because of our shared conviction in a brighter, more equitable, and more unified America. And because we fight like hell to turn our collective values and love for our neighbor into thoughtful, community-driven, positive legislation to end inequities and lift us all up together. And that starts today by organizing virtually in your community to elect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and for Democratic candidates for Senate, Congress, State House, city councils, school boards, and every race on your ballot. I hope you will join me. We're going to be opening this meeting today with a recognition of our past and a look forward to our future. Hate, discrimination, and the enslavement of human beings are the original sin of this nation. Genocide against Native Americans, 250 years of slavery followed by 100 years of segregation against Black Americans, discrimination against immigrants, Latinos, and Asian Americans, and a history of exclusionary immigration and housing policies have created deep and lasting inequities in income, education, employment, housing, environmental quality, and healthcare for communities of color. Democrats are committed to standing up and speaking out against racism and bigotry in our laws and in our communities. We know that Black lives matter. We recognize in our souls that race-neutral policies are not enough to fix centuries of race-based inequities. And we are committed to do better for this and future generations. The Trump administration is using every tool to ensure that communities of color are not counted in the census, which is why we are organizing our friends, families, and neighbors to respond to the census at 2020census.gov. Everyone counts, and everyone must count. There are a few things more important than electing leaders who come from disadvantaged communities. That's why it's so important that Joe Biden picked Kamala Harris, a woman of color, a daughter of California, and of immigrants to serve as our next vice president. And here to lead us in a discussion about where we are in ending these systemic inequities in our system, I want to introduce my friend, Ron Harris, chair of the Midwestern Caucus of the DNC, the only Black regional caucus chair. He's also one of a handful of young members of the DNC Executive Committee. Ron played a leadership role in helping pass key party reforms, including reducing the role of superdelegates and opening access to our party. In his full-time capacity, Ron serves as the Chief Resilience Officer for the City of Minneapolis, where he works to build equitable city infrastructure that supports the vital functions on which society thrives, such as economic development and affordable, accessible housing. He has been a DNC member since 2016. Ron, I'm here to listen and to learn. Up next is our panel on Black leaders in government.
Mr. Chair, Michael, thank you so much for that warm introduction, and thank you for holding space for having this very, very important conversation. Hey, everybody, my name is Ron Harris, as Michael had mentioned, and I am super excited to be moderating this panel with two phenomenal young Black elected officials in our country. I'll start by saying this, we're talking today about systemic inequities and really what it means to be Black in leadership, particularly in government. Coming from Minneapolis, George Floyd was murdered in my city. For a lot of people, that woke a lot of folks up. That for many of us, we've known this reality for quite a long time, but for many folks, they're just not waking up to the reality that things are different for us, right? Things are different for us as young Black folks. And what excites me about this moment is that now we have an opportunity to take leadership in our hands, to take the reins and to shape this country into the direction that we want to take it. So with that, I'm going to introduce our two phenomenal panelists. I'm going to start with Representative Lamar. Representative London Lamar is a member of the Tennessee House of Representatives, representing District 91. She took office on November 6 in 2018 and wrapping up her first term this November. She's the youngest legislator in the current General Assembly in Tennessee. And as a freshman legislator, she was elected as Secretary of the House Democratic Caucus and Secretary of the Tennessee Black Caucus of State Legislators. She's advocated and advanced policies on the national, state, and local levels that support families and healthcare. She's worked as an advocate for public education, where she empowered, enlightened, and engaged parents and community members in failing and priority school districts to also be advocates by utilizing their voices, being knowledgeable in educational policies, and voting on the things that impact public schools and its students. Next up, I want to introduce Representative Malcolm Kenyatta, who is a third-generation North Philadelphian and a fierce civic and community advocate. He's been working to change outcomes in the neighborhood in which he was born and raised, and that he's called home for all of his 27 years of life. Malcolm was born to the late Kelly and Malcolm J. Kenyatta and raised in North Central Philly with his three siblings. He's a product of public school system and graduated from Temple University with a major in public communications and a minor in political science. Now, for Representative Kenyatta, civic engagement runs in his blood as the grandson of Muhammad Kenyatta, who was a civil rights leader, a minister, and a local politician who ran for mayor in 1975. Malcolm got his first start in community activism at the tender age of 11 when he ran for junior block captain. He wrote and won a citywide essay contest with a simple message that is the driving force behind his campaign. We can't sit idly by when we recognize barriers in our communities. We have to do something about them. Malcolm has dutifully served as a member of numerous nonprofit and political organizations, including Liberty City Democratic Club, Smith Memorial Playground and Playhouse, the Philadelphia chapter of National Organization of Women's Education Fund, and Equality Pennsylvania. Like I said, really excited to have these two with us. And we're going to start with you, Representative Lamar. Share with us what motivated you to seek elected office. And in your answer, if you could also outline the ways that you've used and you plan to use your platform to help improve people's lives.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ron. And before I begin, I would really appreciate an opportunity to take personal privilege and take this opportunity to take a moment of silence for the Young Democrats of Maryland, President Joseph Kitchen, who passed this week. So I just want to take a couple of seconds to memorialize him. Thank you so much. So that's a great question. For me, running for office wasn't something that I woke up one day and thought about. It was something I feel like manifested me. When I was a young child, my parents always preached to me about the importance of voting and how important it was to be involved in your community. And from there, I grew up understanding that I have some obligation to give back and exercise my right to vote. And so when after college and being inspired by the Obama election and understanding that I wanted to make some type of change, I got involved in the Democratic Party here in my local city. And when I went to the meeting, I was thinking to myself, where are the young people? I was like the only person of my age. And so I decided to get involved. And when I got involved, most of the people wanted me to just work the sign-in table. And I was thinking, not that I had a problem with it, but I wanted to contribute more because I understood how being involved in the party has such an impact on the political landscape. And so therefore, I started a local chapter of the Young Democrats. And from there, I was able to grow that chapter into the most active chapter in the state within 1 year. And then I became the Tennessee Young Democrats president and served for 4 years. And what I did was I traveled the whole state of Tennessee advocating and engaging young people in the political process, more specifically in the Democratic Party, to develop their leadership so they can run for office and be our generation's next leaders. And so I took that opportunity to find out what is really missing in the political space, and it's our voices. And I decided to do something about that. And so when I had an opportunity to run for state representative, I used those same values and that same drive to make change here in the state house. As I continue to advocate for easier voting access for young people on college campuses, and also articulating other issues that impact my community. And so one thing I do recognize is that being young gives me power. When I think about all the great leaders throughout history that we honor, such as Martin Luther King Jr., the late Congressman John Lewis, everyone, they were all young when they took on this work and began to make change for their communities. So I challenge all those young people here that because you're young doesn't mean that you can't lead your community or take on those leadership roles, because I use being involved in the Democratic Party, just like you all are, to use that to get to office now.
That's powerful. And I fully agree that as young people, we do actually have power. And that's one of the things that we need to share, that message that I think oftentimes as young folks, they look at us as if we don't have power or that we have to wait our turn. And I'm super proud that you decided not to wait your turn. Representative Kenyatta, what made you want to run for office? Why did you seek elected office as a pathway to improve people's lives?
So Ron, thank you so much for moderating this, for all that you're doing. And Representative Lamar, I'd be remiss to not shout out my friend, Senator Akbari, is one of my good friends, and I know you all serve together. Ron, you said something that's incredibly spot on about this idea of wait your turn, right? The time for turns is over. There are incredibly important issues, life or death issues, not just the pandemic of COVID, but the pandemic of racism, the pandemic of environmental racism, of the lack of equity in our schools, and then our capacity as Black and brown folks to build wealth, to own homes, to engage in the American dream in a real way. And I think our work in this moment is to take all these, great things that we say about ourselves as a country, many of them written right here in Philadelphia in a hot summer, much like this one, and make those things real in our lifetime. You talked a little bit about me becoming a junior Black captain, and, you know, I was 11 or 12 and I ran home to my mom and I had all these, you know, ideas about stuff that I saw in the neighborhood that I thought was wrong. And, you know, my mom was a tough Black woman. And she said to me without skipping a beat, well, you know, boy, if you care so much, go do something about it. And that has really driven, you know, my entire work. There are issues, a multiplicity of issues I talked about in my first campaign, and now about to go into my second term, that eradicating deep poverty is the moral and economic issue of our time. It is the issue of our time. If you want to talk about gun violence, then you want to talk to me about systemic poverty. If you want to talk about the climate crisis, then you want to talk to me about systemic poverty. You know, and the way these things intersect requires us to speak up and to use all of our lived experiences as a way to build the equitable change. And I'll just end with this one point that Representative Lamar made. It's so often asked of young people to knock the doors, to make the phone calls, to run all the mechanics of the campaign. But yet when you step up and say, no, I actually want to be the candidate, there are a lot of people who then question your capacity to be involved in this work. And so I'm just incredibly inspired by you, Ron, by you, Representative, for stepping up and saying that, no, obviously I can sign people up on a clipboard, but if I'm gonna be signing people up, it's going to be on my petition to get on the ballot to run for office.
Absolutely.
That's right. I think that we exist for far more than helping other people get elected. We exist to also implement our own ideas and advance our own visions. I'm going to come back to you, Representative Kenyatta, with a follow-up. I've been telling folks ever since George Floyd was murdered that the revolution won't be televised, but it will be intersectional. And you brought up the intersections of systemic poverty. Can you talk a little bit more about this moment that we're in, that we're seeing people start to connect the dots a little bit, that those who are most likely to be harmed disproportionately by police violence are also those who are most likely to be not have adequate access to healthcare, adequate access to housing. Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Well, listen, I sit here as the first openly LGBTQ person of color ever elected to state government in Pennsylvania. And when I walk into a committee room, coming from a working poor family, being Black, being gay, having locked hair, having not attended Ivy League schools. I walk into
all the boxes,
right? I walk into those rooms and bring an incredibly valuable perspective to these conversations. That's not the average perspective. The average person who I serve with is a white male millionaire who has, worked his whole life, moving up the ladder, to be in the role that they're in. But the reality is the solutions to a lot of the systemic issues that exist are going to come from the people who are living that every single day. We need young people who know what it's like to go to a school without heat in the winter and air conditioner in the summer, to not have high quality access to textbooks and to the tools necessary to prepare them to pursue their own dreams and aspirations. Those are the folks who need to be at the forefront of having, conversations about how we fix our education system. If we're going to talk about criminal justice, then we need folks who know what it's like through their own experience or through familial ties to be involved in the criminal justice system and see the ways in which our system is currently designed to give you the justice you can afford. Because in this country, if you're white and guilty, you're better off than if you're Black and innocent in this country. And so we need to be in a position where we are putting at the forefront of these conversations those voices that have existed on the margin. And I would just say this point. It's going to be so critical for us, and we're seeing it in the statistics in terms of folks who are stepping up to run, to stop looking outside our communities for these candidates to come in and tell us about how much they understand. I don't just want somebody who understands. I want somebody who's lived it. And that's the value of what's happening right now with young people who are stepping up and saying, like, no, I've lived this thing and I need to be at the forefront of addressing it.
I couldn't have said it better. Nothing about us without us, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, it looks like we have another panelist joining us. Let me introduce our next panelist here really quickly. I'm really excited to have him here with us today. I think it's going to be really great contributions to the conversation. This is Mr. Reggie Love, whose career is taking him as an American political aide. He's also a former college basketball player and a media editor. You may know Reggie Love as a special assistant and personal aide to former President Barack Obama. He was a walk-on as a freshman at Duke University and later became team captain of the Duke basketball team. He also played in the 2001 championship team, actually, over there at Duke. Mr. Love delves into many of these issues, these needs, and things that he's been through in his memoir, which follows his journey from Duke University, where he played basketball under Coach K, to arriving to Washington in 2006, just at 24 years old, working for then Senator Obama. Mr. Love, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, and I apologize for being late. I was advocating on some community issues with my alma mater before this call, so I'm glad I was able to make it. And thank you for having me. And I really enjoyed hearing Representative Kenyatta and Representative Lamar talk about their journeys as well. So I appreciate all the work and effort you guys are putting in, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to dive right in with you. Like we mentioned, we know that you've worked on the Hill as well as in the White House as President Obama's very, very close personal aide. Can you share with us what those experiences taught you about what it means to be a young Black leader with a heck of a lot of responsibility?
Yeah, look, man, probably since I was 15 years old, I've sort of always been in a scenario where I'm either the only diversity, whether it's on age, race, or geography in the room. As a guy who grew up in North Carolina, in a state when I grew up there, we were 47th in education across the state. I've had a chance to see this really clearly. And when I look at my own journey, and as you mentioned, when I went to Washington, D.C., when I was 23 years old to then work for Senator Barack Obama at the time, one of the things that I didn't understand probably until a year there was that, I went in to take a job that paid $26,000. Now, the reason I went there was because at the time Barack Obama was only one of the 100 senators in the U.S. Senate that were Black. 1% of the U.S. Senate at the time was Black. And then when you look across the staffs, they were even less diverse. And what I knew is that the reason that I was able to go to D.C. were two reasons. One is because I was educated. I was lucky enough to go to a small private school that sent 95% of their kids to college. And then I was lucky enough to play sports in college. My mom ran a hair salon and my dad worked for the federal government, and when I got out of undergrad, I didn't have any debt because I was on a scholarship, and I'd had a little bit of money because I had spent some time on the practice squad in the NFL. And so what I came to realize, and this is why Barack Obama started the Hope Fund, was that, a lot of these challenges are economic. How can you be a 22-year-old first generation college graduate with $100,000 of debt and go to Washington, D.C. to work on the Hill for a guy named Barack Hussein Obama making $26,000? Like, that math does not work. And no one acknowledges that math doesn't work. And so for me, it's like, I fundamentally understand that the only way that we're able to really create true parity is through education equality and economic equality. And one without the other doesn't work. And so Kenyatta made a really good point. You know, in this country, you get the justice you can afford. And really, when it comes down to most issues, it's not just the justice system. It's also healthcare. It's also education. It's also, access to healthy and nutritious foods. All of these things come down to access. And so, and I can't remember if Representative Kenyatta made this point or if it was London, but really the only people that are going to be able to solve these problems are going to be the people that know them. These solutions don't exist out like in Southern California and San Diego or on another planet or in, some tropical island. They like exist in our own communities. And we've got to be the folks who are out there trying to educate people. And right now we're lucky because I think people want to be educated. People feel guilt and pain right now. And they feel like, you know what? I don't know how I missed this. I don't know how we got here. And, we didn't get here overnight, but it was very systematic how we got here. And if you take the time and you take the energy to look at our history and understand the structures that we live under and that our parents have come through, they're pretty straightforward. I used to say this all the time. My grandmother passed when she was 79 years old, and I could never understand it, but she used to keep like dollars in her mattress, which I was like, this is crazy. Like, Grandma, why you got all this money in your bed? And, you go back and you really look and understand the history. Like her parents were alive when the first African-American bank, the Freedmen's Bank, went under. And unlike 2009 and 10, where we had the troubled asset relief program and people got bailed out from those economic turmoils from failing banks, all of that pain was burdened by the African American community, and Frederick Douglass came in and he tried to save it, and ultimately that African American bank would be one of the largest banks in the world today if it were still in existence, and people don't know it, and we haven't taken the time to learn it. And then when you go and you look at the financial services industry today and you say, you've got all these institutional investors like the Duke University Endowment and the Virginia Endowment, and they got, 20 billion here, 30 billion there. And then you ask them, all right, well, how many black managers do you have? And they say, well, we're working on it. And it's like, well, how long have you been working on it? You've been around for 70 years. How long does it take to figure it out? And no one has an answer for it, but ultimately people don't take into consideration that, systematically black people have been locked out of the financial services industry.
That's right.
And it's not super complicated, and it takes the time and the energy to learn these things. And it takes the time and energy for people to say, what can we do to change it? We understand that this is what's happened, and we understand the impact and the effect. And so therefore we want to do something about it.
You brought up a lot of great points, and I really appreciate that. A couple of things that you said. One, these problems are not new. That the reason why so many of us were so upset and we hit the streets because there has been a 400-year-long knee on the back of our collective necks. I appreciate how you've connected the issues to show that we don't live monolithic lives, and those of us who are most disproportionately impacted by some of these things were impacted by all of them. I'm going to slide over to Representative Lamar, and I want to ask you this question. In your opinion, noting that these issues are systemic, noting that these issues are deeply entrenched, and there's nothing new about it, right? There's nothing new about racism. It's just getting filmed. In your opinion, what is the next best first step we can take to address systemic inequities?
That's a great question. And I'm always going to say the best first step is to make sure you exercise your right to vote. thinking about all the things they said on this call about systemic racism, poverty, education, healthcare, all of those issues come down to being put in place by the leaders we elect. And so we're not exercising our right to vote at the polls and really choosing the leaders that best represent our lived experiences, then we can't change the system from the inside out. If we don't have more young people in office, how can we truly create a society that we want to grow up in and we want to live in? We have to have true representation in our leadership. And young people, we are the most educated, most woke, most researched, most technologically advanced generation thus far in history. However, we haven't fully grasped our power when it comes to our ability to exercise our right to vote. You know, I say it all the time, tell young people all the time, you know, voting isn't as simple as a tweet. You know, voting is not that instantaneous like Instagram and Facebook. You have to actually have to get in the car, apply, stand in line potentially, spend some time and go do it. And so we have not figured out how to all the way connect those dots. And I tell young people all the time, if all of us exercise our right to vote, we are the largest base of eligible voters in this country, period. If we use our collective voting power, we will literally decide our next leaders. And that is why I'm encouraging all young people who are upset at what's been going down in our country, all those young people who are marching in the streets for George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and all the other innocent Black people who've been killed by police violence, for all the young people who are upset because they're getting kicked off their parents' health care insurance while they're in college, for all the young people who want to see this country look differently, then I expect you to march yourselves to the polls this November and elect Biden and Harris as our president and VP of this country so that we can take this country back and move it in a way that is going to benefit our communities, our society, and we have leaders in office who have similar circumstances such as us and have lived and walked in our lived experiences and also symbolically reflect the changing demographics of our country. More and more women of color are running for office and winning. And to see Kamala Harris be nominated as the first African-American woman and the first Asian-American woman to run for vice president of the United States is symbolic in how our country is changing into much more of a melting pot than we've ever had before. And even today, why I'm wearing yellow today is because tomorrow is the 100-year anniversary of the women's suffrage movement, where Tennessee was the last state, the state that I serve in, to give women the right to vote, which made it a constitutional amendment. And so today, I honor people like Kamala Harris who are stepping up into national leadership and is trying to take back our country so that we can truly build a country that we all want to live in.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. If you heard that and you're still not convinced to vote, I don't know what's wrong with you. But I tell young people this all the time, right? That I agree with you that the first best step that we can take is to vote. But we also have to recognize that voting is only one tool in our entire arsenal of tools, right? We need people out in the streets protesting. We need people boycotting businesses and voting with their dollars. We need people to be tweeting and posting and that, but it can't just stop there. After George Floyd was murdered on Memorial Day in my city, we saw protests all around the country and all around the world, right? Thousands of people hitting the streets. Can you imagine if all of those thousands and thousands of thousands of protesters who were hitting the streets on their way home, picked up a voter registration form and requested their ballot to be mailed in, right? And they voted, right? So not only do the politicians see thousands of young people in the streets proclaiming that their life matters and are making it uncomfortable for elected officials, they also see thousands of people in the streets who can get them out of office, right?
And can I just add this?
Yes,
I want to say that with that being said, and don't think the others don't recognize the power of the young vote and what it really means, especially when they see them out in the streets. Because I remember being in session while we're protesting for George Floyd, and just this past week, my colleagues passed a bill to further criminalize protesting and try to give them felonies to take away their voting rights. And so young people need to understand that it's more important than ever that you exercise your right to vote and get those leaders out of office, because they know the power that you have and they're trying to take it away. So it's important that you use your power to your benefit, because there's people every day on the other side of the aisle who are trying to strip you of your voting rights and your ability to exercise your right to protest and other civic opportunities to bring equity and quality to our communities.
That's right. I tell folks all the time, if your vote did not matter, they would not spend so much time and energy and money in taking that vote away from you. There wouldn't be voter ID. There wouldn't be gerrymandering. There wouldn't be all these other attempts to take away your right to vote. I want to bring you into this, Representative Kenyatta. I saw you nodding a lot. Let me hear what you think about this conversation.
So first of all, Representative Lamar has been spot on, and Reggie spot on with so many of the things that have been said. And I would build upon it. I would build upon it just to make this point, right? Because I want to make sure that we address the apathy that exists by acknowledging the real pain that's there, right? Apathy is a rational response to being let down by a system over and over and over again. I mean, that makes sense as a response. But I think the point that Representative Lamar made so eloquently, and Ron, that you just made, is that apathy is an intentional part of the strategy to disenfranchise Black and brown voters. The easiest fight to win is the one you don't have to fight. And if we can, and if folks who do not believe that we need to address the existential crisis of climate change, who don't believe that we need to do anything about a criminal justice system that I often call an injustice system, who don't believe that we should do something about the fact that across even educational attainment, housing and the ability to access housing is limited even to Black folks who've gone to great fancy schools, still have lower rates of home ownership than white folks who don't even have a high school diploma. And so if we don't want to address those things, one of the most effective things I can do is convince you that nothing will change, is convince you that you engaging in the process is futile and useless. That is one of the effective tools. But let me also, say this on the other side in terms of giving up that power. We have so often just given it away, And my grandfather would say to folks who say, well, I don't do politics. Let me tell you something. Well, politics does you. Politics does you, whether or not you do it or not. You are not immune to the decisions that are made because you choose not to participate. You are going to be impacted by these decisions, irrespective of your decision to engage or not engage. And I would just close with this final point. And my campaign manager, when I was running for office, used to always say to me, Malcolm, don't say this. And I didn't listen to her, and I said it. I would say to people all the time, the sky is not going to open up if I get elected. All of these systemic issues are going to disappear because Malcolm was elected. We didn't get here overnight. These issues aren't going to be solved with one election. That is the reality of the situation. And I think that when we think about the movement that we're going to need to create systemic change, it's not, politicians are up here and then every other role is auxiliary to political leaders. Being a political leader is one role. I mean, I'll only use a football metaphor because it's the only sport I really understand. But if you have a good quarterback on the team and the whole offensive line leaves, that quarterback's not going to win that game. So if we elect great people, but the folks who are the nonprofit leaders say, well, Ron's elected now, I'm good. The folks who are the block captains say, well, you know what, Reggie's involved now, so I don't need to show up and do the things that I'm doing. If our civic leaders decide, well, you know what, I'm super inspired by this elected official, so I don't have to show up now. We have to get out of this mindset of believing that being an elected official is the only role that matters and is the only role where we see change. There are these young people who've marching all across Pennsylvania in 61 of our 67 counties are directly responsible for the multiple pieces of criminal justice reform that were passed and signed by the governor, directly responsible for that. These bills have been introduced long before the tragic murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, but they did not move until people recognized their power and showed up to the Capitol every day and said, we're not moving until y'all do something. So all of these roles are valuable, and running for office is just one way to get involved in this coalition to provide the change that we need.
Y'all are preaching today. Y'all are preaching today. Let me say this. You're right that when more of us run, more of us vote, right? When they see people like us, not only on a physical level, but with the ideas and the visions, we're going to get a lot more people to go and vote. Democracy is not a spectator sport. We got to wrap it up. Unfortunately, we were just getting ready to get hot. We got about a minute left. I'm going to start with a couple of closing remarks. I'll start with Reggie Love to close us out. And if you can, in closing us out, can you talk a little bit about the private sector's responsibility in this fight?
Yeah, look, I'll go quick, and I think one, Malcolm's right. It takes a village, and you can't have a quarterback without an offensive line. You got that analogy spot on, and my favorite line is that you got to go out every day and get 5 yards. And if you get 5 yards on every down, like, you end up scoring a lot of points. And I know oftentimes we get enamored with like trying to solve everything in one fell swoop, but ultimately, incremental change, systematic, consistent incremental change ends up being really big change. And, when you look better at our history, post-Civil War, African Americans we had our power, and we had our vote taken away systematically through Jim Crow, through poll taxes, through literacy tests, through all these structural things. And my grandmother would say that if you don't vote, you are the problem, because there are a lot of people out there that are our family members and our grandparents and our great grandparents who walked in the heat and got assaulted by dogs and police officers, had hoses turned on them, lost their lives, for us to have the ability to go out there and to express our constitutional right. And if we ever forget that, then shame on us. And in terms of what the private sector can do to have an impact, I think, I believe that I work in the world of financial services, and oftentimes we like to believe that if we let free market do its thing, everything will turn out okay. But I try to explain to people we don't live in a free market. This is no perfect economy. Everything is built on history and built on structures that have been in place either really, really long times or short periods of time. And so for me, I say, look, we have to do what we need to do in order to continue to get people to believe in the American dream, to continue to get people to believe that the social fabric of this country is worth buying into and worth believing. And if we're not out there doing what we can do to provide hope and to provide vision and opportunity for our communities, then ultimately the business sector will not be able to operate in a way that allows us and them to prosper, right? We'll essentially be Venezuela because without the belief that this system works for all people will decide to opt out of it.
Thank you for that. We get a couple seconds left. I'm gonna give you 15 seconds, Representative Kenyatta, and then we'll go to London Lamar to close us out, and I'll finish this out.
Listen, I'll just leave you all and thank you all so much. Just really happy to be on this panel. I'll leave you all with the words that Kelly Kenyatta said to me, my mom. If you care so much, go do something about it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing about it. Representative Lamar.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. It's been a pleasure to be on this panel with Representative Kenyatta and Mr. Reggie Love. And Ron, thank you so much. And most importantly, I want everyone listening to know, if you truly want to create a country that is going to uplift our generation, allow us to thrive and achieve the American dream, I need everyone to get to the polls this November and vote for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris for President and Vice President of the United States.
Thank you for that. Thank you, folks, so much for joining us on this panel. The three of you are amazing. I really appreciate all the work that you're doing to change this world. Everything you said was right. And I'll close by also saying this, that if young people, right, under 40 years old, if we voted at the rate that baby boomers voted, not only will we win every single election, they wouldn't even be close. We have power, y'all. We have power to change this world. We got less than 80 days left. Let's get to work. Thanks so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Ron Harris, and our panelists for that fantastic and inspiring discussion, and for all of your leadership working towards ending inequity and systemic racism. Now I'm very pleased to introduce award-winning actress Chloe Grace Moretz. This is her second time speaking at the Democratic Convention. She spoke at the National Convention 4 years ago when she was a first-time voter. Chloe, welcome to the DNC Youth Council.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I am so excited to be here with you all at the Democratic Youth Council. This council is about recognizing that our youth are our future, but that our voices and our votes also have the power to change the world today. Joe Biden knows that young Americans have had a tough run. Millennials came of age in a time defined by 9/11, war, and the lasting impact of the 2008 financial collapse. Generation Z has grown up in a time of school shootings, crushing student debt, and broken politics. But he will make sure this crisis now doesn't rob our generation. As president, he'll provide 2 years free community college for everyone by attacking student debt, and 4 years of free public college for families making less than $125,000 a year. It means attacking the climate crisis, investing $1.7 trillion to build a 100% clean energy economy. $400 billion for research and innovation, which is more than we spent to put a man on the moon. And tax credits to incentivize electric cars, batteries, and other energy efficient new technologies. Creating 10 million good paying jobs in industries of the future. And it means gun safety, This spring was the first time since 2002 without a school shooting. It shouldn't take a pandemic to keep young people from being killed at school. Vice President Biden will stand up to defeat the NRA. He did it before twice, and he'll do it again. Joe Biden will make sure Americans of all ages do their part to give the next generation a fair chance. And when we do, there's no limit to the incredible things that young Americans will do. I really wish I could be there with all of you in person, but I am proud to be a member of a party that believes in science. It's our job to model leadership, to put public health above politics. And that's what we're doing with this convention. I am really excited for what's coming up at the Democratic National Convention, and I am so glad that you are joining us here today. I want you to know that this convention and this party is for everyone. But Joe and Kamala can't do it alone. They need every single one of us to do our part. And as the late John Lewis taught us, democracy is not a state. It is an act, and each generation must do its part. He left us with our marching orders. The future of our country is on the line, and we cannot let him or each other down. So please register to vote at iwillvote.com. And if you're already registered, double check that the information is up to date and request a vote by mail ballot or find out information about early voting. Text youth to 30330 to get involved in the campaign, and make sure that your voice is heard at the ballot box. Make a plan to vote early. Know how you're going to vote, whether it's by mail or in person, and make sure that your friends and family have a plan to vote too. Because this is more than an election. As Joe says, it's a battle for the soul of our nation. And with fewer than 80 days left, we have to make every single one of them count. Thank you guys again for having me here today, and enjoy the rest of this incredible program.
Thanks so much, Chloe. Really appreciate that. I'm very excited to hear from our next speaker. Ted Lieu represents California's 33rd Congressional District in the United States House of Representatives. Congressman Lieu is serving in his third term in Congress and currently sits on the House Judiciary Committee and the House Foreign Affairs Committee. A former active duty officer in the U.S. Air Force who currently serves as a colonel in the reserves, Ted has established himself as a leader on the environment, on cybersecurity, civil liberties, government ethics, veterans, and speaking truth to Donald Trump on Twitter. Please help me welcome my friend and Congressman Ted Lieu.
Thank you, Michael, for that wonderful introduction. And I want to thank everyone participating in today's wonderful event, and to the DNC Youth Council for all that you do. I am thrilled that my friend Kamala Harris is now the vice presidential candidate, and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are going to take over the White House and bring our country back to normalcy again. And one way we can do that is to make sure that young people vote. When I was first elected to Congress as a member of the freshman class, I joined what's known as this caucus in the House of Democrats. And it's not because I am young, it's because I look young. And so in this caucus, we go around to different colleges and to different universities and try to fire up young voters. And what ended up happening is, if you look at what happened between 2014 and 2018, the midterm turnout increased from 20% in 2014 to 36% in 2018. That's a whopping 79% increase of young voters between the ages of 18 and 29. That's one reason we flipped the House last term. If we could do that again, if we can increase voter turnout among young people, we're going to flip the White House. And that's why it's so important, everything that you do to energize young people to vote. And we know that when young people vote, they tend to vote Democratic. Young people tend to believe in science. Young people understand that climate change is a major threat, not just to the United States, but to the entire world. And young people understand that engaging in racist, bigoted, and sexist attacks is not the future of America. I also want to note that we have a huge problem right now with the post office. That's why, under the leadership of Speaker Nancy Pelosi, we're going to come back for an emergency session this coming Saturday to work on legislation to stop the sabotage of the post office. At the same time, there's something very simple that you and your friends and family members can do to make sure that your vote gets counted in November, and that's simply to vote early. So if you're going to vote by mail, just vote early. Tell your friends and family members to do that. If you're going to vote on election day, make sure you have a plan. Make sure that you prepare for the possibility of long lines. And with that planning, we can make sure that our votes get counted. And at the end of the day, it's not just what people think. It's if they take that one action, which is to vote. And you can have a huge role in doing that. And I want to conclude by talking about Abraham Lincoln's quote, which I think still resonates today. He said that public sentiment is everything. With it, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed. So understand your power to shape public sentiment. If social media, for example, is free, if you write a post that resonates, maybe a voter in Florida or Ohio or in Georgia will read it. Think about writing letters to the editor. It's true that newspapers get lots of letters to editor. It's also true many of them come from the same people, and most of them are not young people. So if you start writing in, then eventually you'll get published and you can start shaping hearts and minds. So understand your power to shape public sentiment. And with your help and support, we're going to have a blue wave in November. And I look forward to continuing working with you as we make America a better place. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Congressman. Our next speaker served as Democratic leader of the Georgia House of Representatives for 7 years prior to running for governor of Georgia, where she won more votes than any other Democrat in that state's history. She launched Fair Fight in 2018 to ensure every American has a voice in our election system, Fair Count to ensure accuracy in the 2020 census, and the Southern Economic Advancement Project, a public policy initiative to broaden economic power and build equity in the South. It is my distinct honor to introduce Stacey Abrams.
Thank you so much, Michael, and thank you to the Youth Council for this invitation. You've heard a lot about what is to come, but I want to tell you about how I got to here. When I was a college student at Spelman in Atlanta, Georgia, my first election was 1992. I became 18 in December of 1991, but before I cast my first ballot, April 29th, 1992 was the Rodney King decision. We saw a racial reckoning, or so we thought. We had people in the streets. I helped lead demonstrations. We had a sense of activism and engagement that was infectious. But we also had an election that was coming up in November. And sadly, between those uprisings and that election, the fervor died down, but the pain didn't. And we know that for so many of us in that generation, we missed an opportunity to demand more. We missed an opportunity to stand up and say we should be seen and heard, and the challenges we faced needed to be front and center. It's not to say that young people didn't participate in the election, but it was about how we participated, what we did, and what we demanded. What we face in 2020 is not identical to 1992. Now we have technology that links us together in ways we never imagined. Now we have a national conversation that did not occur in 1992. And now we have candidates running to lead our country who see us, who hear us, and who believe in us. And so I'm not here to talk about what will be done. I'm here to talk about what we need to do. Michael was kind enough to mention that I've had a little bit of free time since I ran for governor in 2018. I created 3 organizations because I believe in the ecosystem of our democracy. And so Fair Fight is focused on election administration, making sure that our right to vote is real. And as Chloe said, we have to do our work to make a plan. We have to fight against voter suppression, not be panicked or frightened away by what we hear on the streets or what we see on television or on social media, but take it as a challenge and say that we are going to make a plan and we're going to ensure that everyone we know makes a plan. Whether we vote by mail, vote early in person, or vote on the day of the election, we are not going to be turned around and turned away from owning our right to this democracy. I created Fair Count because young people are among the hardest to count, and they get counted out too often in our census. And this census tells the story of America for the next 10 years. And your generation deserves to be seen and heard. You deserve to be counted. And your political power, your economic power is only made real if you are included in the 2020 census. And so make certain that you don't listen to the misinformation and the scare tactics. They know that this generation can change the future of our nation. That if you can vote and you are counted, that you can take the levers of power and steer us in the direction of justice, in the direction of recovery, in the direction of change. And so make certain that you are counted in the 2020 census. But the last thing we have to do is demand the policies we need to see. Policies for justice, for recovery, for opportunity. And that means that in November, we have to ensure that there is a Biden administration preparing to take office in January. That means that we have to do everything in our power to lift up our voices, bring our friends, bring our families, bring our frenemies. We've got to bring everyone we know and folks we may not know we need, but we've got to come together because this is our nation and this is our shot. And so I'm so excited to be here with you because I know that you're going to do what is right, to be seen, to be heard, to be included, to be engaged, and to take us forward. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you guys in November.
Wow, I could listen to Stacey Abrams all day. Thank you so much. Every one of us can make a difference in this election. Each one of us has the power to send Donald Trump packing and send Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to the White House. For more than half a century, Joe Biden has fought for the underdog, from lifting up workers and middle-class families to protecting survivors of domestic abuse through the landmark Violence Against Women Act, to leading the fight against the NRA and the gun lobby in the United States Senate. As vice president under the nation's first Black president, Joe Biden helped lift our economy out of a recession, rescue the auto industry from collapse, secure marriage equality and other protections for those who identify as LGBTQ, and expanded healthcare coverage for millions of Americans, including those with pre-existing conditions. I'd now like to invite Hannah Bristol and Lubna Sebastian to share some ways we can work together to elect Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and Democrats up and down the ballot.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hannah Bristol. I'm the Young American Engagement Director for the Biden campaign, and I'm so thrilled to be with you here today and to be part of such an incredible program of speakers who've been such incredible advocates for young people and making sure that young people have the right to vote, and also that young people are empowered, are an empowered political force and are able to make sure that the issues that we care about are represented. I grew up in Virginia and got involved in organizing when I was a freshman in high school. Like a lot of other young people, a cool senior told me to skip school for the day and go knock on doors on election day. And I was like, you're cool. Yeah, I would love to do that. And so I went out and I started knocking doors on my local Senate race and realized how incredibly powerful it was that as a young person, I didn't have the ability to vote. I didn't have money to donate. I didn't have a lot of the conventional avenues to political power that older generations have, but I was able to register. I was able to talk to people. I was able to turn out my friends. I was able to build an incredible organizing force to make sure that people knew that young people were politically powerful and that we had demands and that we wanted political change. And so following that experience, I've been working on a number of political campaigns. I've also been involved in a lot of movement organizing, especially in the climate movement. And I think it's incredibly important that we as young people work to get people elected and make sure that we're able to advocate for the issues that we care about to ensure a better future for ourselves. And so this year, I was working for Elizabeth Warren in the primary. I came on to the Biden-Harris team a month ago, and I'm super excited to be here with you to elect Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and Democrats up and down the ballot to ensure that we defeat Donald Trump. And now I'm going to introduce Lubna.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lubna Sebastian. I'm from Bethesda, Maryland, and I'm the National Director of Students for Biden on the Biden campaign. And I ended up joining the Biden campaign last July, and we started the Students for Biden program just a month after. So it's almost going to be a year very soon. So I ended up getting civically involved in college. I graduated from UC Berkeley last May. And while I was in school, I was able to start my very own sorority. It's a modern local sorority dedicated to inclusivity. And I was able to start the Berkeley chapter of It's On Us, which is the Obama-Biden administration's campaign to tackle campus sexual assault. And while I was there within that group, I was able to see how important it is to bring over national resources to local conversations and local community organizing. And I was able to knock my first doors in college as well during the 2016 race. My biggest moment that really pushed me towards being really politically engaged and looking at politics and campaigning as a job was the summer before my senior year. I ended up taking a paid internship at an airline over a offer that I had at a U.S. senator's office. And I ended up taking the paid internship because it was in a new city. It was going to be paid. And at that time, I figured that I could maybe work for a senator later on. But I was in my office at a corporate headquarters when news of the Trump administration's policy of child separation came out. And I completely felt like I was in the wrong place. I felt like I was supposed to be at that U.S. senator's office doing something, even if it was picking up phones and talking to constituents or logging notes in the computer. I felt like I should have been able to do more. And so during senior year, I applied to hundreds of jobs. I just wanted to do something with my life to see if we could make Donald Trump a one-term president. And I ended up getting a job offer with the Biden campaign, and it's been an amazing experience so far. And I am really passionate because I personally am a permanent resident, so I can't vote yet, although I did put my naturalization application back during the Iowa caucus. So I actually have my civics exam later this month, so I'm really excited. But I really wanted to see if I could get politically involved, even if I couldn't, cast a vote. I still wanted to do something. And these times are incredibly tough for young people. Students face unemployment, crushing debt, a planet that's not sustainable. And I just want young people to feel like they are part of the political process. There is a seat for you and you deserve to be taken seriously and be part of the conversation. And so I want to make sure that young people and students especially feel like they have a home within the Biden campaign.
So Lubna and I are thrilled to be working together to build out this program and make sure that we're able to create a lot of pathways for young people to get involved and make sure that they are part of this process. Like Lubna just said, we know that young people are hurting right now. We're in a public health crisis that has taken more than 160,000 lives. We're in an economic crisis that has left tens of millions out of work. And we're in a moral crisis that has left our nation reeling in anguish and anger over the systemic racism that has plagued our country since its founding. And all of these things are felt so strongly by young people and are so definitional for those of us who are coming of age and who are coming into like inheriting the leadership structures of this country. And on top of that, we have so many long-term threats to our future, like climate change, and the stakes are just so high for us. And this is so much a part of our story as well. I spent 4 months unemployed this spring. I've moved 5 times this year, and it's been incredibly hard figuring out healthcare during a pandemic where it feels especially terrifying to be uninsured. It's been really hard navigating an overwhelmed unemployment system and making sure that I was able to get my benefits, as I know is the case for so many other people. And it's been hard to figure out how and where to vote when I've been housing unstable like so many young people and have been staying with friends and family and moved 5 times. And I know that I've been super fortunate to have that kind of community support. But we shouldn't have to be lucky in order to be safe and housed and insured during a global pandemic, and to make sure that we are able to advocate for the future that we deserve and know that we are safe and know that we are going to be able to have a livable planet and a planet that feels equitable and where everybody has a fair shot. We deserve leaders who will listen to us, who will advocate for us and fight for the future we deserve. And we need to elect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to be those fighters. We're the boldest, most diverse, and most progressive generation. And we know that if young people turn out at the same rates of older generations, we will win. And that's why they're trying so hard to stop us from voting. They're even coming after the Postal Service. So we know that it is confusing to figure out how and where to vote this year, especially if you, like me, have been moving around a lot this year. We need to be talking to our friends and family about the stakes in this election. We need to make sure they know why we are so excited about this ticket, what this ticket stands for, and the future that we will be able to have if we are able to get Trump out of office and elect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Our program is targeting all young voters 18 to 35 to mobilize and protect their vote. And we, for our volunteer base, are going even younger. We know that it's incredibly important for high school students and other young people to be involved in this process because, I started that young, and I know that so many other people who are probably listening in have as well. And all of us have a stake in the future of this country. So we're building this coalition of young people united to defeat Trump, and we need you on our team. We need you to help us make calls, send text messages, register people to vote, talk to your friends and family. And we need to all hands on deck in this final sprint to make sure that our friends and family are making plans and figuring out where they need to vote, where they need to be registered, who's on their ballot, why the down ballot races are so important. And in order for you to join our team, we need you to pull out your phones right now and text youth to 30330. So that's youth to 30330. That's the best way to get involved. Lubna and I will make sure to follow up with you. And you can join our watch party on Wednesday night. We have a pre-program starting at 8:30 with Mayor Pete Buttigieg, and we would love to have you join us there. And now I'm going to pass it to Lubna to talk a little bit more about how students in particular can get involved.
Yeah, so our national program for student outreach, as I mentioned, is Students for Biden. What's really great about it is we also have two additional groups, HBCU Students for Biden and High Schoolers for Biden. And I think what's really interesting is that both of those groups and all of our chapters are created and expanded by students. We had students come to us and say, we want to start Black Students for Biden. We had students come to us and say, we think young AAPI students should have their own group. And so what's really incredible is that the Biden campaign has been able to make sure that students have intentional space and have the creativity to build out their own groups. And so when you sign up, you get a really great starter kit that I'm biased. I made it. That's why I think it's great. But you get so many great resources. You can connect to other students, join regional Facebook groups. You can follow each other on social media. We give you tools on how to learn to recruit students based on what kind of campus you're on. And then we also make sure that you know how to talk about Joe, because talking about Joe starts with talking about yourself. Why did you get involved in this election? Why did you decide to sign up? Why do you want to see a change happen? And once you're able to talk through and think through what issues you care about, it's a lot easier to talk to other people on the phone or while you're text banking or while you're engaging online. And so that's why we make sure that you have the tools you need to learn how to share your personal story, connect it with Joe's vision for America, to have more intentional and thoughtful conversations with people who are really trying to figure out how to get involved in the political process, especially for the first time. And so what's great is when you sign up, you can decide the level of engagement that you would like to have. So some people sign up and they see our weekly newsletters, they get updates on Joe, they know what to look for upcoming events like our watch party on Wednesday, and that's what they want to do. Other people are able to see exactly how to build out their own student group, and they can learn how to connect with our state staff in battleground states to get really involved. And you can even join one of our tactical teams on the Young Americans program. So if you're really good at storytelling or videos or, designing graphics, there are ways for you to get creatively involved in that way too. And so what we're really planning on doing now up until the election is to work with our key battleground states to build out our teams there. And if you're not in a battleground state, there are still so many ways to get involved. You can act as a sister state and join our distributed team, which phone banks and text banks and does volunteer support for critical states. So if you're in a state like California or New York, we want you to get involved. And every single person in every single state has a part to play in this election, and we'll make sure that you're able to do so. And you can find us at joe.link/students, but the easiest way to join is by texting students to 30330, and that's how you can get plugged in. And we're so thankful to be here. We really hope you come to our watch party. It's going to be so much fun. And once you sign up, you'll be able to see all of the really exciting events that Hannah and I are planning right now. We can't say anything about them right now, but they are so exciting. So we really hope you sign up to join us soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Young people know that climate change is an urgent priority for our planet. We are scared about what the climate crisis means for our families and our homes because we already see its impact. While public opinion is already with us, our leaders don't always see our planet, our species' only home, the same way. That's why, across America, we must end the corrupting influence of fossil fuel executives on our politics and elect leaders who stand up for the health and well-being of all people. All of us have a role to play. And today we're going to hear from thought leaders and grassroots activists who are fighting to lift up the voices of vulnerable communities who are demanding environmental justice and the protection of our planet. If we unite, we can transform our voices into political power that creates good paying jobs, union jobs, and a sustainable home for future generations. I'd like to introduce our moderator for this panel. R.L. Miller is the chair of the California Democratic Party Environmental Caucus and the founder of Climate Hawks Vote, which identifies, trains, and elects Climate Hawk leaders. And as of this Thursday morning, she will be a new member of the DNC. Up next is our panel on climate change.
Hi, folks. I'm so honored to be here with three of the awesome youth activists that give me hope for the future. We've got Kayla Brathwitt, we've got Hugh Lay, and we've got Ashley Nicole McCrae. And I'm going to begin by simply asking each of you, and I guess I'll start with Ashley, what calls you to this work that you do? What makes you do what you do?
Thank you. Huisi Wapani, Patu Washte, Wichapi Watui Imachi Yapi. My name is Ashley Nicole McCrae. I am an enrolled tribal member of the absentee Shawnee tribe of Oklahoma. I'm also Oglala Lakota. I work with the Indigenous Environmental Network, which is an international organization fighting on the front lines of the climate crisis world round. And I am residing here in the state of Oklahoma. In 2018, I was the Democratic nominee for the statewide Office of Corporation Commission, which in Oklahoma oversees oil, gas, utility, and transportation. So as an Indigenous woman, really what calls me to this work, this has been a lifelong battle, not just for my people, but for all people across this nation to stand in unity with Unchimaka, our grandmother Earth. And it has become very apparent, especially today, that we are in a position of extreme decision making. We can either make a good decision and ensure that we will have a climate that is clean, that is safe, that is inhabitable for future generations, or we can go the other route and put profit in front of people. And so for me, as an Indigenous woman who has been dispossessed of her land, has been relocated from her sacred sites and her holy places, and understands this deep connection with Unchimaka, my grandmother Earth, living here in Oklahoma, we are home to the pipeline crossroads of the world. More pipelines intersect here than anywhere else. We are also home to frac quakes, where we actually accept 5 other states' disposal water from the fracking. the operations that are being disposed into our land. And so here in Oklahoma, I really understand what it feels like to be treated as a disposable people living on a disposable land. And so really all of these things, my experience as an Indigenous woman, my experience working for a long time in the environmental justice movement, working with Indigenous Environmental Network, and living in Oklahoma, where we are so hard hit by climate crisis, not just through the Trump administration, but for administrations before that. All of these things have brought me to where I'm at today, where I really want to fight for a Green New Deal, using an Indigenous just transition, recognizing that Indigenous people must be centered in these spaces, at these tables, in these decision-making processes on stolen Indigenous land, and also fighting and advocating for other BIPOC and queer voices to be centered in these spaces, because we are most impacted by the climate crisis. But we want to make it very clear that what Indigenous people, Black folks, brown folks, low income and other vulnerable communities are experiencing right now is something that all people will face if we don't work collectively to end the climate crisis. Thank you.
That's awesome. I'm going to ask the same question of you. What keeps you awake at 3 a.m? What motivates you to do what you do? And what do you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Arlen. Thanks, everyone, for having me on here. My name is Hugh Lay, and I'm a campaign representative with the Sierra Club. So what sort of called me to this work was back in December of 2017, I was a senior at the University of California, Santa Barbara. And we were in the middle of our dead week, which is the week right before final exams. And after exams, we would then go on our winter break. But Mother Nature, actually a utility power line caused what is now dubbed the Thomas Fire, which erupted in Ventura County and started spreading north, making its way to the Santa Barbara area. And myself included and everyone around me, all the students were scared. We saw the videos and the photos of the fire's devastation. Combined with the stresses of studying for our own finals, it created a very chaotic situation for our campus community. And although we were technically safe from the physical fire itself, the effects from the smoke and the inhalation of the smoke from the burnt wildlands and structures was absolutely devastating for everyone's health and safety. You couldn't see the sky. It was almost pitch dark black. You couldn't breathe, and it was constantly raining ash. And at the time, I was serving as our university's student body president, and I had no idea what to do. I mean, this was sort of beyond the pay grade of student government, but I had heard countless feedback from my peers who reached out and told me about the health problems that they were having from the smoke, especially those with asthma, and felt like they were risking their health and lives for a final exam that could be taken either online or at a later date. So myself and a few other student leaders decided the best thing to do was to push our administrative leaders to take action and to cancel finals and to let every student go home and start winter break early. Our student senate had to create an emergency fund to give financial assistance to students who incurred any sort of medical fees from this fire, or to cover transportation costs for them to be able to flee back and head back home. Eventually, as the fire got closer and the air quality index still remained in the extremely hazardous levels, our administration finally caved from student pressure and canceled finals and allowed students to go home. So this firsthand experience with the Thomas Fire enlightened me and made me more interested in working in the climate change arena post-graduation. And after I graduated, I actually went to go work on Better Works Senate campaign, where I was based in Houston, Texas. In Houston at the time, I just recovered from their own devastating flood. And as an organizer in the community, knocking on doors, making phone calls, particularly doing outreach to low-income neighborhoods that were predominantly Black and brown, it became clear to me that these communities had not yet recovered from the flood and that they were left out of the recovery process. As I was knocking on doors were hanging off hinges, fences were torn, windows were broken, that it made me think deeply and critically about how certain communities were left behind, while other areas in Houston, particularly the more white and wealthier areas, were almost practically pristine and had made a full recovery. So following that campaign, I had now become deeply committed and sort of made my own connection between solving not just the climate crisis, but making sure that we leave no community behind in doing so. And so I was fortunate enough to now get a job with the Sierra Club, and I've been here since March of 2019, advocating federally and at the state level for climate change solutions.
Thank you so much for what you're doing. I'm a Woolsey Fire survivor, so yeah, this stuff gets real personal real fast. Kayla, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, 0 Hour? What drives you?
Thank you, RL. Primarily what calls me to this work is the imagination I have for collective liberation for my people and for all people. My name is Kayla Brathwitt. I'm the 19-year-old director of operations of 0 Hour, a youth-led, women of color-led climate justice organization fighting to dismantle the systems of oppression that have caused the climate crisis. I live in North Carolina right now. We know that the same systems that have thrown us into, the ever-looming existential threat of the crisis has also been responsible and rooted in white supremacy. And we can see that through the prison industrial complex. We can see that through the violence against Black and brown folks, both at home and overseas. And we know that all of these systems of oppression are interlinked, and that it is impossible to talk about one without analyzing how deeply entrenched they all are within our day-to-day lives. I'm called to this work because I have firsthand experience of how the fossil fuel industry exploits Black and brown working class folks. The only reason I live in the States is because the oil refinery my family was dependent on in St. Croix, U.S. Virgin Islands, was shut down. They filed for bankruptcy in around 2012. So I had to move from my home due to the unsustainability of that industry. But I have hope for humanity. I have hope that we'll eventually listen to our ancestors who have provided us with very clear victory plans against our greatest feats: colonialism, racism, a really exploitative economy that preys on working class and brown and Black folks. I've been working with 0 Hour for the last year or so, educating folks on how this movement needs to be intersectional. And then with Sunrise and my role there, we've been working nonstop to build the political and people power necessary to change our lives. Even this morning, the Sunrise North Carolina hubs got together. We woke up Tom Tillis, who is one of the architects of North Carolina's inequities and injustice. We woke up at the crack of dawn. I didn't wake up because I just stayed awake throughout the whole night, really anxious and excited about this. But really calls me to this work is the belief that we can build a mass movement that is multiracial, that is multi-class, intergenerational, and more. Because all of those together would mean that we would be unstoppable and that we'd have the ability to change the material conditions of our lives. Particularly what calls me here today is knowing that the youth are ready to own our power. We're organizing for our lives day in and day out. I see my friends in the streets. And I know we're particularly concerned about climate change, the intersections of all of those systems. Racism, the lack of affordable healthcare, not being able to live with clean air, with drinkable water in the next few years. And having youth voices in this space is instrumental to connecting with that group and pushing us to keep doing that work.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Full disclosure here, I'm not youth myself. I have youth at home, and I'm in this because I have youth. I have children at home, and I want them to inhabit a world better than the world that I am in. And I am afraid because of Trump. And so the first question I'm going to have for you, Hugh, is how has Trump affected your chances for a habitable climate?
Yeah, absolutely. Number one, Trump and his cronies at the White House, at the EPA, the Interior, Department of Transportation, they've been nothing but an unmitigated disaster for our climate and the future of our planet. Since entering office, they've scrubbed all evidence and any mention of climate change from their websites and their reports. They've used their political appointees to suppress the work of career-long scientists and researchers by silencing them and gutting their funding, causing hundreds of them who have been working in these respective agencies for decades to leave their jobs. It's clear that their priorities are not with the future of this planet because they've pledged their loyalty to big oil and gas even further, issuing executive orders which expand their offshore drilling capabilities, rolling back greenhouse gas standards for light-duty vehicles, undermining states' authorities to set emission standards higher than federal ones, and loosening restrictions on carbon emissions from coal and gas power plants, canceling requirements for oil and gas companies to report methane emissions, allowing coal companies to dump debris into water streams. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. There's over 100 rules and regulations that they've rolled back. And what this means for us as youth is we won't have any clean air. We won't have clean water. And all of this is going to exacerbate the effects of climate change even further and the natural disasters, from hurricanes in Florida, floods in Houston, Texas, to raging wildfires in California. This scares folks like myself and my peers. And we have to ask ourselves a critical question, like, are we going to be able to have our own children or grandchildren? These are all thoughts that keep us up at night. And this is sort of why we're in this fight right now to elect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, who, if elected and put into office, day one, we will have actual competent leaders that not only believe the science behind climate change, but will actually listen to the experts in dealing with this crisis. A Biden-Harris administration means that they will gain some trust back from our allies and rejoin the Paris Climate Accord, and their overall climate plan will put us back on a path to combating this issue head on. And Biden's clean energy plan calls for a 4-year, $2 trillion federal investment to make sure that we get 100% clean electricity by 2035 and economy-wide net zero emissions by 2050. And if we can achieve those things, then perhaps we will have a future for all of us to be able to accomplish our dreams and our goals.
And I know you touched on this a little bit, Kayla, but what do you say to somebody who is marching for Black lives? How do you get that person to care about climate change? How do you get the Latina marching to protest Trump's inhumane border policies to also care about the impact that the border wall has on climate change on species at our border? How do you get the laid off worker who's worried about their next paycheck from caring about, how do you get that person to care about climate change, which too many people think is something that's far off and distant in the future?
Yeah, thank you. So I'd say the best way to bring folks into this movement who are not like your typical like college age, like affluent white like student, the best way to bring other folks into this movement is to like share stories. I was brought into this movement by friends of mine sharing how they were personally impacted by the climate crisis. I know like I've been here for a little bit more than a year, and every day I learn more about like how I'm like a frontline, how I'm part of a frontline community. And just like share a bit, I am from St. Croix, the United States Virgin Islands. It's like pretty frontline community. It's a really small island, about 84 square miles. My family was dependent on the oil refinery for income, like many folks on that island. And there's also a dual edge to this. Like while we were making income, the fossil fuel industry was exploiting us, like getting like profit off of our bodies, harming the health of folks there. And so understanding how environmental racism plays out in Caribbean communities, like that's a way to bring those folks in. Understanding how the strengthening hurricanes over the years are impacting like the soil there, and are ways to bring those communities in, and just like really focusing on the intersections of the climate crisis and how you can't separate any of these issues. Understanding that racial justice is climate justice. We know that when we focus on our most vulnerable communities, we will all be better off, because centering those folks and making sure that they're safe almost necessitates the destruction of oppression. And then we will all be free. So like understanding and like connecting with them about that, and also just like legitimizing their fights, knowing that like you don't have to be in the climate movement to understand the implications and the existential threat, because we're all fighting for change, and we're all fighting for liberation and freedom. And so we're all separated doing our own work. It all adds like, I don't know, this really cool pot of like freedom for us. And that's like a good way to bring those folks in, I think.
And Ashley, one of the greatest things I've seen happen in the climate movement over the last few years has been the Green New Deal. Can you tell us a little bit about your hopes on what you would like to see out of a Green New Deal and how you think the Biden administration might work on that?
Absolutely. So my work with Indigenous Environmental Network is centered specifically around the Green New Deal. I am their policy outreach organizer. And at IEN and among our frontline communities, Indigenous communities, we understand that it is crucial that we push forward policies that do promote renewable, sustainable energy. One of the big pieces that we've worked on recently is the People's Orientation to a Regenerative Economy. And within it has 14 different planks. And like Kayla said, this is a very intersectional movement. And so many of those 14 planks, they touch on Indigenous sovereignty, the movement for Black lives, immigrant justice, housing justice, because we understand that this future that we all want, that we're all trying to build, really is about the destruction of colonization, white supremacy, and capitalism. We must really move away from these systems and these frameworks if we really want to live in a future that does have a regenerative economy and does enable liberation and equity for our communities. This is definitely something that we all want to push forward. And so our hope and our dream is that we do push forward Green New Deal. We do understand that, there is the Green New Deal, the AOC marquee policy that many of us have become accustomed to, but also realizing that on the state level, many different policies are being pushed forward that do relate to the Green New Deal, that are collectively moving forward into this regenerative economy and this regenerative future. And really our position is that the Green New Deal and its policies, we're moving toward this way anyway. We see huge companies like Blackwater, who are major investors in oil and gas, moving toward regenerative economy portfolios. And so the trend in the market is already there. And so we really need to make sure that we center the most impacted voices, which on Indigenous stolen land are Indigenous people, our Black relatives, our Latinx relatives, who we also consider Indigenous, other brown and impacted folks. And so when we get all of these different people at the table, we're sharing our different stories like Kayla was mentioning, and we're able to come to this shared collective understanding of how we're each being impacted and the ways that colonization is really harming all of our communities, even those communities that seem to benefit from these systems of white supremacy. We're able to really build and start envisioning a new framework in which we can actually operate. And so that will be our biggest challenge, I believe, is really moving away from this framework that we're so used to, which unfortunately I do have to push on the Democratic Party and President-elect, hopefully, Biden, around carbon markets, around green capitalism, and really pushing some of our members on this call to move away from those false solutions to the climate crisis. We cannot put ourselves in a neoliberal position where all we're doing is sweeping these issues under the rug and making folks think that we're in a better position when really all we're doing is kicking the can down the road for more generations in the future to deal with. And so for me, as an older youth, as a millennial, I understand my complicity and my responsibility in really kicking this can down the road for our Gen Z members and our Gen Z youth. And I think that that's completely unacceptable. They inherited this issue. We inherited this issue. I think that it's incumbent upon us to stop it in its tracks. And for that, that means really challenging people who are in positions of power like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to really push away from these false solutions, because our communities are depending on it. For some people, it may just be a matter of policies or feelings, but for some people like Indigenous people, lifting up carbon markets, moving to green capitalism, it really is a matter of life or death, because we do consider Unchimaka, our grandmother Earth, one of our relatives, and all life as well. And so that's some of the work that we're doing with the Green New Deal, really trying to help encourage people to move away from these harmful frameworks that we keep getting caught in, and really imagining and envisioning what it will look like to move into a future that does rely on a regenerative economy and that does center Indigenous just transition, meaning that we're also listening to our Black, Brown, queer, and other impacted relatives. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for what you're doing. I have to say, speaking from California, I know that Kamala Harris is a strong voice for environmental justice, because she knows that we can't fix the climate if we don't also fix people. I'm really excited about her. And I'm going to ask, I'll start with you, Ashley. What are you going to do between now and the election to make sure that we do end up with Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and people who will listen to us rather than this hell on earth garbage dumpster fire?
Absolutely. So my position here in Oklahoma, I am affiliated with the Oklahoma Democratic Party as their affirmative action statewide representative. And so a lot of the work that we're doing here in this state is really just reminding people what a Trump administration will mean for us. I mean, it will mean nothing good. From the climate perspective, especially just today, the Trump administration opened up ANWR for oil and gas drilling, opened up leases for this land that is sacred to Indigenous people, and that is one of our last, hold sites of protection. And all we've seen throughout this administration, especially here in Oklahoma, where we are very much a test site for these poor policies and these horrible decisions to take place, we've seen the EPA rollbacks impact our communities terribly. For instance, whenever they did the coal fly ash, the ability for states to decide how that will be regulated and how that will be handled, Oklahoma was the very first state that they allowed that to happen in. We already have basically virtually no regulations around spill off, around toxic spills, around how we deal with the byproducts of fossil fuel extraction. And so for that to happen here in our state, to see Oklahoma basically becoming a dumping ground for other states fracking wastewater, in addition to being a practice ground for Trump's terrible, deadly policies, I think that people here in Oklahoma, at least those who are Democrats, we understand, and independents too, we understand that voting for Trump means only more poison water, only more poison air, only more layoff, because we're hitting these bubbles, these economic bubbles with the oil and gas industry. And we're putting our workers, our oil field workers, in a position where they're losing their jobs. And so it's really, really important that we encourage people, especially Oklahomans, especially people in the Midwest who are being really hard hit by the climate crisis, to move into renewable energy, to move towards this regenerative economy. And the only administration that's willing to do that at this point will be a Biden-Kamala administration.
Hugh, what can you do to get people your age and other ages to turn out for this incredibly critical election, besides just telling them that this is the climate election of our lifetimes, as if that isn't enough?
Yeah, well, it definitely is the most important election of my lifetime, for sure. But what I will say is that I am incredibly optimistic given what we've seen by the amount of youth energy and youth activism starting the beginning of this year on Earth Day. Youth climate activists organized some of the largest gatherings, although it had to be digital, to show their support for the climate movement. And if we can channel that energy on towards the election, we can make a real difference in deciding the fate of the White House and also all the other down ballot races from the Senate to the congressional seats and also local races as well. youth have the opportunity to elect climate champions. And that is going to decide the fate of our planet in coming years. And so what I would say, and what I will be doing myself, is having conversations. And I think now, just given the global health pandemic, I think youth are going to be very much more inclined to be having these sorts of conversations digitally, messaging, texting, phone banking, social media outreach to their friends and their peers, and having these sorts of conversations to really emphasize how critical this election is and how critical it is to elect climate champions such as Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and making sure that we get rid of Trump and his cronies who do not believe in this science whatsoever. And so so I'm hopefully optimistic given what we've seen so far. And it goes beyond just voting. And I think youth really have the opportunity to be more engaged this year, now more than ever.
And Kayla, one last question, and I think we're going to need to wrap up right after you. What do you want people to do after the election? Because it's not enough to just vote and then go back to sleep for 4 years.
Exactly. I think we need to understand that voting is just really one passive tactic of change, and that historically movements have needed a wide range of tactics to prove meaningful and successful. We won't find liberation from voting every 4 years. And unfortunately, we don't have time to keep playing around with that. We need to continue this movement even after November 3rd. We can use voting to widen the framework of our work and the limitations that we sometimes experience with electoral politics. We can use education to build our consciousness and advance the material conditions necessary for liberation from white supremacy, colonialism, and justice everywhere. And lastly, I just want to say that when you're continuing this work to specifically uplift the most vulnerable in our communities, the Combahee River Collective shares that to free Black women is to free everyone, because to free our most vulnerable folks demands the destruction of oppression. So just centering and reckoning with that post-election is central to strengthening our movement.
Thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to working with you guys, both to get Joe Biden and Kamala Harris elected, but also to flip the Senate, get rid of Tom Tillis, change rules, change the Senate's filibuster rule, and move forward. Let's start taking back our planet. Let's start taking back our power. So who's with me, guys? Fossil free.
Thank you so much, RL and our young climate activists, for sharing your unique perspectives about our moral and overriding obligation to protect the planet. I'm really excited to introduce our next speaker, a civil rights and public interest attorney and one of the best grassroots organizers in the nation. Keith Ellison served in the Minnesota House of Representatives before becoming the first Muslim American to be sworn into Congress, where he served as the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Today, he's the first African American and the first Muslim American to be elected to statewide office in Minnesota. I would like to introduce my friend, the people's lawyer, the Attorney General of the state of Minnesota, Keith Ellison.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Good to hear from you, man. How you doing?
Great.
Hanging in there. All right. Well, so it's a real pleasure to be with everybody. I look forward to having a little dialogue if that's possible. There are a few urgent things that I want to share if that's all right. The first thing is that, look, we started out with this president that we have now with one of the most misogynistic presidents bragging about sexual assault. But that was followed up by the Women's March, which is the most amazing outpouring that any of us had ever seen. In small towns, big cities, Washington, D.C., we had people standing up and saying, no, the rights of women are going to be respected and asserted. Yes, it's true that we had him pull out of the Paris Climate Accords. Outrageous, right? But we had the Science March, and we had people asserting the need to take climate action. We had state, local governments and activists coming out. We had state attorneys general suing ExxonMobil, the American Petroleum Institute, and the Koch brothers. Minnesota did that, absolutely. And we saw response. We saw this horrific hatred against immigrant families, but then we saw people like state attorneys generals and people, activists on the ground, asserting the rights of DACA recipients to be here where they grew up, the country that they know, people going to the border, people protesting and suing over the child separation policy. My point is, over and over again, this president does really bad things, and over again, we respond and step up and say, we're not going to sit back and let this president run roughshod over the rights of people. It has been a consistent, recurring theme. We have done this time and time again, and I'm proud to tell you that our resilience has been quite remarkable. Trump's absurdity and his meanness and gratuitous cruelty is not that remarkable. We're used to it. But our resilience and our willingness to stand up and fight for our fellow Americans has been coming back and back and back again. And I can tell you, I'm really proud to be a Democratic Attorney General, because we are fighting on the forefront of protecting the Affordable Care Act. He tries to tear it down. We fight to stand up for it. On the issue of policing, he's come to Minnesota today. He's in Minnesota today, attacking Ilhan Omar, attacking the city council who's trying to transform policing. But what are we doing? We're standing up. We're talking about new models of policing. We're standing up for the elected representative that we chose, despite his desire to get rid of her. We didn't listen to him. We listened to ourselves and our own community. So these things are happening. He's attacking our post office, literally attacking the post office, this institution that started hiring on a non-racial basis after the Civil War, that hired more veterans, more working class people, more people of color, more women. This institution, the post office, which is provides people with medicines, with the mail that they need, and critical to the vote in this time of pandemic. You know what? We're stepping up, all of us together, including Dem AGs, standing up to protect our post office and fighting back. And so right now we need, whether you are, no matter what age you are, but certainly if you're a young person, I'm asking you for something. I'm asking you to say, you know what? We are going to get out there and we are going to invite and entreat and engage everybody in this democratic process that we possibly can. We're not going to leave anybody out, not just the college kids. What about the kids that didn't go to college? What about the kids in the military? What about the kids who are working in our shops and our factories? What about the kids who are essential workers, making sure that everybody can have some dinner? as we are dealing with this COVID crisis. I'm talking about the shopkeepers, the people who are stocking groceries, people who are really risking their for the rest of us. We've got to reach out to them, politicize them, and make sure they understand the stakes that are in front of us. And that is something that we have a little less than 100 days to do. And I just want to say that it is the young people and that more than anyone else who can carry the critical message on climate, on work, on wages, on the right to organize, all these critical issues that you all have in front of you. And I just want to say that there's something that I want you to tell the older folks, and that is this. Look, it's not just about an election. It's about a lifestyle that is inclusive, that is democratic, small d, people on the critical issues 365 days a year, on election year and off. If we acted like our main job is to have a relationship with the people who we represent, then these elections would be a whole lot easier. It's only if we get transactional and start engaging people at a time when we need them to vote for us that it feels a little bit awkward and transactional. If we shifted our political philosophy to be, it's about relationship building and engagement, we could do much more. And that's the direction that I hope we go into. Small donors supporting the issues they believe in, supporting their neighbors, reaching out to seniors, middle-aged people, the youth, people of all races and backgrounds and colors about the issues that they care about most. You know, politics can help you build community. You can have a disjointed community where nobody knows each other, and politics can help you knit that community together. Because name me one other issue where you can talk to a perfect stranger about the most critical issues that affect all of us all the time. Politics allows us to do that. Politics allows you to cold call somebody and say, let me tell you, who do you think should be president? What do you think about healthcare? What do you need to do about climate? And they will share with you critical things. And it is this relationship that helps us use politics to build community. And I think we should take this opportunity and we should remind people that it's not over on election day. It really just begins. That's how we co-govern with our elected officials. That's how we stay involved with our elected officials. Say, you know, we help get you there, right? And we want to talk to you about what matters to us most. We're going to hold you accountable, but we're also going to support you. So with that, I just want to say that it's exciting to be in touch with you guys. We are in the times of our lives, are we not? Nobody will ever forget 2020. Crazy president, the possibility for real change, dealing with climate issues, dealing with George Floyd crisis and the revelation of unjust criminal justice system, all during a pandemic. Wow, if you're looking for excitement, do we ever have it in 2020? But it's the time of your life and the time of mine. Let's meet the moment. Let's do what we have to do and make the society better than ever. Not back to normal, but to the future, a better future than any of us have ever seen.
Thank you so much, Attorney General. That was great. Thank you. Thank you. As we get to close to the end of today's meeting, we wanted to sign off with a special treat. So please help me welcome Ashley and Finnegan Biden.
Hi, everyone. How you doing?
Hi, I'm Finnegan.
And I'm Ashley. Thank you, Michael, so much for the introduction. Like you, we are here this week because we care about our future. And all of you have done so much to fight for our future the last few years, marching, organizing, and getting out the vote. So thank you for all that you do. I'm also here because I love my dad. He's an amazing father, and I believe he has the character and the vision to lead this country right now. You know, when I was younger, I spent a lot of time with Dad in communities that were hurting. I saw schools that didn't have the resources mine had, kids growing up in poverty, experiencing hunger and violence, families struggling to keep a roof over their heads. But my dad never let us look away. He taught me we had to stand up for those who were being treated unfairly, that silence was complicity. Right now, people are suffering. We're experiencing collective loss and grief at the hands of the pandemic. We're struggling to keep our economy afloat, and we're outraged at the systemic racism that continues to plague every aspect of our society. And young people are bearing the brunt of this economic crisis. Businesses are closing. People are losing their homes, their jobs, their healthcare, not to mention schools across the country thrown into disarray. This is the season of our lives where we're supposed to be working on our careers, building our families, and buying our first home. After living through the 2008 recession, my generation faces another massive economic crisis during a critical moment in our lives. Gen X is feeling the pain too. The job market collapsed just as they're about to enter it. But even before all this, we knew the systems weren't working. As a social worker, I've helped countless young people who saw no way to afford college, Black and brown students trapped in the school to prison pipeline, and men and women in need of a second chance. It's just because we get, and there is no one better to lead us forward. Dad has an ambitious plan to tackle climate crisis while creating new, good-paying jobs. He will improve, protect, and expand healthcare. He wants to impose stricter gun measures to stem the tide of mass shootings in our schools. And he will dismantle systemic racism that permeates society so that everyone has a fair shot. But it's not just about his policies, is it? It's also about character. Our family has experienced great loss and pain, joy, adventures, and a whole lot of love. But no matter what our family has been through, my dad never gave up on me, and he never gave up on my family. And I promise you this, he will never give up on you. He will work to make you proud. He will fight for you and all of us in the White House. But now he needs us to have his back. I know that all of you are here because you know right now we need to fight harder than ever, because after 3 years of Donald Trump, it is clear that our health, our jobs, our rights are on the ballot, and our future depends on what happens in November. So let's get our peers registered. Let's educate them on the issues. Let's push them to vote for Joe Biden and the Democrats down the ballot. And you can find ways to get involved by going to joebiden.com/join. And together we can reclaim our future and help our country move closer to its founding promise of a more perfect union. So please keep up the good work. Thank you for all that you do. We're so proud and grateful to have you on the team. Please stay encouraged, stay focused, stay kind, and stay healthy. Thank you all.
And I'm Finnegan, and I want to echo all of my Aunt Ashley's words. It's so fun to be with you here today, Aunt Ash. And I want to thank everybody else for joining. I'm so glad to see that so many of you have logged on for today's event. I love sharing this space with so many young people as passionate about politics as I am. And yet, we all have different reasons for being here at the DNC today. Maybe, like me, you're frustrated that more isn't being done to stop the climate crisis. Maybe you're demanding that our country finally live up to its founding promise of equality for all by fighting white supremacy and working towards a racial justice system that works for everyone. Or maybe you're angry that unlike every other industrialized country on earth, we have not beaten the coronavirus or kept guns out of our schools. I hear you because I share those very same feelings. My generation has grown up in the age of weekly school shootings and televised police brutality, a tanking economy, a 5-alarm climate crisis, and increasing inequality and polarizing politics. And like millennials before us, our generation also faces the devastating reality of being worse off than our parents. So we can't go back to normal that we saw before Trump. The way things were not good enough. But I want you to know, my grandfather understands this, and I promise you, he's going to deliver us a better future. On the major issues of our generation, he plans to make changes that we want to see. On climate, he's going to invest $2 trillion with a T in transforming us into a clean energy economy. This will create new jobs, sharply cut emissions, and bring us to carbon neutral by 2035. On guns, he'll pass universal background checks and get assault rifles off of our streets and, importantly, in our schools. On education, he'll invest in our schools and our educators, and he'll replace Betsy DeVos with someone who actually has taught in a public school. And on racial justice, he'll work towards equity in housing, labor, and criminal justice, because he knows we can't have true justice until we attack systemic racism that is prevalent in every aspect of our society. His vision is big, it's bold and concrete, and it meets the urgency of the moment that we're in. We're all here because we agree that we need real leadership right now, not the total failure that we've seen from Donald Trump. My pop knows how to get things done because he's done it before. And I know that he'll do it again. People often ask me, what is it like to be the granddaughter of the vice president? Of course, there are some pretty unique parts. Not everyone has a Secret Service detail at their lacrosse games. But what I've loved most about him is how he really listens. He asks my opinion on things that matter. He wants to know what's going on in my life and the policies that affect my generation the most, because he really cares. That's how I know he'll listen to our generation too. And he'll take note of what we care most about, because that's the kind of man that he is, and that's the kind of president that he'll be. But he needs our help to elect him, and his incredible running mate, Senator Kamala Harris. If we can mobilize our friends, get them registered, and turn them out to vote for our future, then our generation can be the ones who send my grandfather, Joe Biden, to the White House. So please help us. As my Aunt Ashley said, you can go to joebiden.com/join to get involved. We need you. Now let's get to work.
Thank you to all of today's wonderful speakers. Primetime coverage for tonight's convention will begin at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Tonight's keynote speeches will be from Senator Bernie Sanders and former First Lady Michelle Obama. I'm also looking forward to hearing from Democrats, such as Senator Catherine Cortez Masto, Senator Doug Jones, Governor Gretchen Whitmer, Congresswoman Gwen Moore, Congressman Jim Clyburn, and many more. Thank you all for participating in today's meeting. Tomorrow's meeting of the Youth Council will begin at 3:30 p.m. Eastern. I call this meeting adjourned until then. Have a great evening.